so they're in.
Cool. All right.
It says it is now. Sweet. No problem.
Yes, I saw that.
Vice Chair, you got to straighten out on the clock. How are we doing on the clock?
We're good. It's time.
20-second warning?
No, well, we're past 12:30, so you're good to go if you're
My
ready.
angle, thank you. My angle looks like we got another minute.
Well, and I didn't bring my logo
You
shirt,
got-
but at least this is a t-shirt. Well,
Optical illusion.
halfway thinking there.
Tech, how we doing? Are we
What's going on?
up and running?
Good.
I'm not trying to stand there.
All right. That's one of the advantages of being a ring walker. We have a gavel. I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is a meeting of the Board of Supervisors Finance and Audit Committee meeting on August 1st, 2023. Yes, it is August. Call this meeting to order. Thank everybody for taking time out of the schedules today to attend this meeting. For those that may or may not have been here before for this meeting, I'll go ahead and read the purpose. The purpose of this committee, the Finance and Audit Committee's purpose is to assist the Board of Supervisors in fulfilling its oversight responsibilities for financial reporting and internal control systems and the audit process. So that's our general purpose. We're going to cover a lot of numbers today, so if you're allergic to numbers, now's a good time to take an antihistamine. And we're going to be moving pretty quickly too, so I apologize if I have to keep some of the discussion a little bit brief. We've got an awful lot of ground to cover, and we'll try and get through all of it and be mindful of the time, people's generous contribution of their time. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. The minutes were circulated in advance to this committee on page 2. At this point, are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, move to approve the minutes as presented.
Has been moved. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. And any abstentions? Okay. And just for those that may or may not know, we have 5 voting members. They're the only ones allowed to vote. So if you're here and you're not a member of the committee, you can vote, but it won't count. So, the 5 voting members are the 3 members of the Board of Supervisors, and the County Administrator, and the Director of Finance. For those that are unaware. Next item on the agenda is the audit kickoff. We have our auditors in the house, and I'm going to turn this over to Vic. Would you like to introduce the auditors, or is that Carla?
I'll introduce them. Yeah.
Sure,
So this
okay,
is
great.
Betsy Hedrick and Andrea Nichols. They are with PB Mayors. They've been our auditors for at least 5 years, probably longer. We are up for contract renewal or RFP this year, but now is about the time that we start making our audit entries. They will be here the week of September 25th to come check us out. And they put together a presentation, so I'll let them go for it.
All right, sounds good. Good afternoon. I am Betsy Hedrick, and as Carla said, this is Andrea Nichols, and we are very happy to be with you today. We have a very brief presentation to share with you, and so it sounds like you have a busy agenda, so we won't take much of your time unless you have certain things that you want to talk about with us, which is really the purpose of us being here. Just on the first page, our commitment, a little bit of a reminder about the fact that we are a regional firm, but we have ties to the 5th largest CPA firm in the nation, and we share their resources, their audit methodology, their training, and really have access to their experts all over the country. So that's a nice backup for us when we have our audit practice. As far as the local government niche goes, that is one of the industries and the areas within the firm that we focus on. I'm so glad because that's what I have spent my entire career doing is local government work. So I'm glad I have a firm behind me that says, yeah, this is an area that we want to go deep in. So we have extensive experience serving state and local governments. And the last bullet point on here is the other one that I wanted to call your attention to, and it's just that we have a history of clean peer reviews and quality control reviews. We were subject to a quality control review by the APA last year, and it was as clean. We've never had one with findings, knock on wood, in my career, and we're really proud of that because quality is really important to us within the firm, and we have a very strict quality control plan that we execute on a daily basis. So the next page, client service team, a little bit about our roles. I know Mike Garber is usually here meeting with you, and on this particular engagement, and actually on a lot of our county engagement, we assign two partners to it. We feel like that's the way that we can give the best service. One of us is usually more into the weeds, the other one takes that high-level approach, which I think is really important because they can add a lot of insights too. And so Mike and I together lead our government niche within the firm, and we've worked together for 25 years, so both of us have, again, extensive experience. Andrea, I'll kind of let you go ahead and introduce yourself and your role in the audit.
Absolutely. I'm the audit manager. I have had 18 years of experience with local government audits, and this is pretty much all I do all year long, so I love working with municipal governments and all the federal compliance and things like that. I'm the one that works most closely with Carla and her team, so the day-to-day logistics, getting things done, answering questions, things like that. And then I also wanted to mention Michael Corrali. He is the in charge for the Goochland-Powhatan Community Services Board. And then Antonina McAvoy. As various IT questions come up, we use her. She's done some work for us in the past on the IT part of the audit. It's just really nice to have that deep bench where she can answer kind of the more technical questions that maybe we don't deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. And the next couple of slides address audit committee oversight, but you're already all over that and knowing what your role is here. So I'm not going to read all of this to you, but just remind you that our audits are conducted in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, government auditing standards, and then of course we follow the Virginia Auditor Public Account specifications. So we will be issuing an opinion on the financial statements of the county to schools. That's also included in your annual comprehensive financial report, and a part of our contract is to audit the Goochland-Powhatan Community Services. We'll also be doing a single audit, and that's an area that Andrea specializes in. So our planned deliverables on the next page, obviously our audit reports, we have quite a few agreed upon procedures that we have to do for the Auditor of Public Accounts, the Sheriff's Internal Control one, landfill certification, the transmittal agreed upon procedures, the data collection form, which is a federal requirement, and then our BRS examination. So in addition to the audit, there are other engagements that are tied to that and are required to be conducted. And then Andrea is going to talk a little bit about audit approach, but before she does, when we issue our arrangement letter, we also are required to issue a planning communication letter, so hopefully you've seen a copy of that. But really that, again, summarizes how important it is for us to have open dialogue if you were to have concerns or anything that you wanted to share with us as we develop our audit approach. Because every year we take a fresh look at things, and that's part of our risk assessment is hearing your insights. But we also remind you that we have to be independent. We have strict independent rules that we follow within the firm, but also following the professional standards, government auditing standards, and all that. And so we just always want to make sure that we're sharing any potential threats to those independents between each other. Like this year, if we are to assist with drafting financial statements, we have to put in certain controls to make sure that we remain independent, and we do that in accordance with our professional standards. So the rest of this planning letter just talks about our process, materiality, significant risks of material misstatement that we have to assess on every client, not just the county of Goochland, and our timing. Okay, so I'll turn it over to you. Great.
Question,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
So the Goochland-Powhatan Community Services Board, since that's a regional organization with another, obviously with Powhatan, do you have a relationship with them, or are we conducting the audit on behalf of both counties? But how does that work?
Yeah, well, our contract is through Goochland County, so we don't, when we report, we still report out to their board, which includes members from Powhatan, but as far as getting audit substantiation with the county being the fiscal agent. Most of our work is conducted here.
And do they share any, since we're helping them out with an audit, do they share any of the costs for that?
That one I
think
not
the
sure.
answer is no.
Okay,
If I find out differently, I'll let you know.
okay, great.
If I might, the cost is probably borne by the CSB, which is made up of funding from both entities. So it's possible that there's financial contribution that way.
You just follow. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great, so I will take the audit approach. I know some of you might be familiar with our audit approach, but it's always good to just reiterate it. If there's one thing that you remember from this page, it's that we do not take a cookie cutter approach. We tailor everything to your specific facts and circumstances, and not only of the entity as a whole, but also from year to year, because things do change. And so to start our process, especially for clients who we've been fortunate enough to serve for many years, we begin with a brainstorming process. What could go wrong? How do we keep our audit approach fresh? How do we keep tests from becoming stale? And so some of the things that we do implement are putting fresh sets of eyes on the engagement, making sure that we don't have the same people always doing the same tests, and that we are putting that rotation in. We're always coming up with new approaches, ways to use data analytics and things like that. So just as we kind of go through the process from start to finish, we start with the brainstorming. We obtain an understanding of both the county and the schools through a process that we call the preliminary phase of the audit. That's where we're really looking at all your main transaction cycles and seeing, are the controls that should be in place actually in place? And so I know it's very important to this group here to know, is the audit going well or is it not going well? I can report that we have completed the preliminary phase of the audit, and that part has gone very, very well. Everyone is extremely cooperative, all the information that we needed, and we didn't have any unexpected surprises come out of that process. Then after that, then we take a step back and we perform a risk assessment to see, based on the facts that we have gathered, what are the risky parts of the audit, where could things go wrong. And so the planning letter that Betsy mentioned just a moment ago contains two of those risks. One, of course, is always management override of controls. That's going to just be an existing risk, because the risk that something could go wrong, management could override, and fraud or errors could be committed. And then the second one is new for this year, but it's very similar to one that we reported last year with GASB 87. GASB 96 is our new standard for this year, related to subscription-based information technology arrangements. And I'll go over that in more detail here in just a couple pages. But the risk would be that this is a new standard, and the year of implementation could have some complicated or tricky accounting. So we're just required to report those risks to you.
And I'm just going to add on, we are required to share with you those significant risks now. That has changed. When we say risk of management override, that is expected for us to document under professional standards for all of our clients, whether you're a local government or in a different industry. So not anything new, just something we've always had to do before, but we may not necessarily have had to talk about it in this meeting.
Absolutely. So then gathering all those risks, all that information that we've gotten from the preliminary phase of the audit, then we move into the further audit procedures that we do in the final phase of the audit. And that's what Carla was mentioning. We're coming back at the end of September to really hit your accounts hard, that based on your June 30 actual balances, and make sure that what is reported in the financial statements is accurate. Then you can see here, then we go through writing the financial statements and delivering all the reports, and then reassessing how did the audit go and what do we need to know for next year. So then as we continue the second page under audit approach, I'm not going to read in detail everything on here, but this just gives you a good kind of summary of all the different areas that we look at. And I'm happy to answer questions in more detail. And then as we keep going, the new accounting standard that I mentioned was GASB 96. If you're familiar with GASB 87 for leases from last year, this is very, very similar to that, only instead of leases of tangible things, these would be intangible information technology arrangements. subscriptions, looking at things like maybe your Microsoft Office or different softwares that you use for the school, things that need to be captured for a right-to-use subscription asset and liability. And I know Carla and I are going to get very, very familiar with this standard, but it sounds like you're in very good hands and all that implementation is well underway. I just wanted to point out to you that you will see new elements in the financial statements related to this.
Okay, just for a second here?
Absolutely.
Sure. I mean, the trend over the last few years has been to put more things on the balance sheet, more disclosure. So the first one, I guess, was the unfunded pension liabilities, which are determined by the General Assembly, not necessarily by us, because they tell us what benefits and how much to fund and all that. But we've capitalized that, and that's on the balance sheet now. And then it was OPEB, right? Other post-employment benefits. Those have to be capitalized, and the underfunding was higher. Now, I guess, with this new pronouncement, we've got to capitalize all leases, whether they're operating or capital leases, either one. They all have to be capitalized and put on the books. What's next? I mean, one of the things they've been talking about is economic development incentives, where you give out an incentive and it's not capitalized anywhere in your books, it's not shown anywhere. Is there anything coming around the corner that is the next thing that is going to require additional capitalization and put on our books and records for full disclosure?
Well, the next big thing is that GASB is getting ready to issue a new standard on the financial reporting model, and it will completely change again the way that your annual comprehensive financial report looks.
Okay.
So, you know, we have been reporting under GASB 34 almost my whole entire career. They're going to go in and they're going to revise definitions, and then they're going to change how those statements look.
So
And
more than just the initials.
it's
of what you call
going to be a
reporting.
much bigger deal than just an actual standard on, you know, a particular topic. It's going to be looking at revenue recognition
Right.
and everything, which will impact budgeting and so forth. But they haven't actually issued the standard yet. It's just an exposure draft, and so I think we initially heard they were expecting to issue by the end of the calendar year, but that's been delayed. And then once that rolls out, I don't know if you all remember back when 34 was issued, it was issued in tiers. So the big governments had to go first, and the middle tier. That's how they're planning to do the reporting model. So
Is this going to bring GASB closer to GAAP? I mean, we're bringing government standards closer to the
not
private sector?
necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Again, every time GASB, I think, issues a standard, they say that it's supposed to make the financial statements more transparent and easier to understand. So they're taking another new look at this, so we'll see how the results of that
It's still going to
ends up being.
Are they going to change the basis? Is it still going to be a modified cash?
They're going to change the description a little bit, but it's still I think the biggest impact will be on taxes and how we recognize revenue related to taxes. Because right now, in your fund statements, we do that 60-day accrual, and I think that could be the piece that has the more significant change. But definitely classifications, they're going to look at different buckets of transaction cycles and how things fit.
Okay. You know, it's just nice to take a look around the corner and see what's coming.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
And then the final slide is just to remind you again that we have, and you have this every year, you know, we have a requirement to consider fraud in our financial statements and fraud risks. And so as Andrew talked about earlier, when we do our brainstorming sessions, that's an area that we really spend a lot of time on. Where could things go wrong? Where could the misappropriation happen? And, you know, what controls are put in place to mitigate that or to prevent them from happening? But, you know, if you ever have someone who has reported something to you that gives you concern, that you feel like, okay, the auditors need to do a deeper dive into this area, that's what we want to hear from you all. So you have a responsibility to share with us if you have concerns, and we have a responsibility on our end to make sure that we're giving good attention to that risk.
Okay, great.
And that's
You find much corruption in government? Never mind.
Yeah.
Next page.
And I just want to say, you know, I know we are at the end of our contract run. We certainly appreciate all the years that we have been in this role, being able to serve as the county's auditors. And we will give you our absolute best this year on this audit. And so we appreciate your time today. Do you have any other questions for us?
Let's see, questions for our auditors from the committee? Yes, sir.
I'd never thought about this before, but in regards to the school's portion of the audit, I know that we get engaged with sort of their financial director Do we and should we ensure that a board member, a school board member, is present so that from a leadership perspective and a board perspective, that they're engaged with what is being asked? Is that common with other localities? Should we have a board member engaged? Sort of in that brainstorming session like you talked about?
Well, when we do our fraud inquiries, not just at this level.
I'm talking about the whole audit. For the school
But
portion.
for the schools, we do make sure that we reach out to a school board member to ask whether they have any concerns so that they have an opportunity with their own governments to share with us whether or not they have certain areas they
Is
want.
it a position or is it just the board in general?
Generally, we interview the chair, but there have been times that we
Great.
have interviewed.
Good, thank you.
And of course, the director of finance for the school
Yeah,
is
right.
invited to attend these meetings, and district superintendent schools and whoever else would like to. This is open to the public. So. Okay. I've got a couple real quick. I'm going to violate my own rule here, but you mentioned earlier that I think maybe Carl had mentioned that PB Maris has been our auditor for about 5 years. I just want to make sure for those listening at home and those here that we have changed the leader, the audit team leader, for a fresh set of eyes. So it's the same firm, a different set of eyes looking at our books. Because the rule of thumb, I guess, is somewhere around the 3 to 5 year period where it should be revisited. And so maybe halfway through this 5 years, we've had a change in the eyes to look at which I think is helpful. In the last 10, 11 years, I think we've had 3 different audit firms, in addition to having 2 sets of PB Mayor's eyes looking at it. So we do change the lookup every so often. We mentioned the differences between GAAP and GASB, that for those that are coming from the private sector, government accounting is a bit different than private sector accounting. And I'll leave it to those to do some homework to figure out the differences. This audit is for the June 30, 2023 year end, which is behind us. The audit is ongoing. The audit report is due to the state of Virginia by no later than the end of November. Now in the past, that's created a little bit of an issue because our last board meeting before the end of November is the beginning of November, and it's created a bit of a challenge for the audit to get completed before the first week of November. And then our next board meeting would have been the first week of December to approve it, and then it would be delivered late, so we've had special board meetings toward the end of November to approve the audit. I understand that they have changed the rules just a bit at the state to allow us the first week of December to go ahead and approve the audit and not be have an asterisk next to our report saying it was late. So is that still the case this year?
It isn't. Actually, the due date now to the APA is December 15th.
December 15th.
For all of counties.
Fantastic. So that takes the pressure off of that. Good. Last thing is low risk versus high risk auditee. I believe we're in a low risk category now that we've had clean audits for at least the last 3 years and maybe more. Is that your understanding as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So that affects the amount of sampling you do and the amount of deep dive that you may or may not have to do for low risk audit.
Especially in the federal single audit area. Yes.
Great. Okay. And some of this I already do. I'm just sharing with a lot of folks either doing at home or appreciate that. That's all the comments I had. Thank you very much for your time coming to Goshen.
Thanks for following up.
Thank you very much.
Safe trip back. Some people view the auditors as oh, here they come. We view it as friends that can help us do a better job. So.
And that's what we want to do. We need to maintain our independence, but we do want to partner with you to serve the county.
Exactly. Thank you. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the FY 2023 four-quarter projected results and recommended fund balance changes. They can be found on pages 3 through 6 in your packet. And I think, Carla, you're going to do it?
I will. Yes.
You're going to take the powers on this?
Yes. All right. I've got it up here. I'm not sure if anyone in the room can see it, but it's also in the hard packet. I am predicting, and I want to say that this is as of June 30, but Betsy just mentioned the 60-day rule, so we won't know actual figures until end of August, but we are beginning of August, and I am thinking we will bring in revenue $12 million over what we budgeted, mostly due to real estate taxes, personal property taxes, and even interest this year. The department's returning funds, this happens every year, but because we have 2 more weeks of bill payment that goes back towards FY23, this is still just a rough estimate, but I'm thinking the departments will return about $4.4 million, leaving us with the operating surplus of $17 million. However, of that, as you know, we pay our capital projects out of, we pay our CSA funds out of that for a total of $7 million. So after all is said and done, I am thinking about slightly under 10 million will go back into the general fund balance this year, which is higher than we've had in the past.
We had a good year.
We had a great year.
Questions or thoughts on this?
I would point out to the committee at the bottom, where we are in full compliance still with all of our policy guidelines as far as debt, as far as unassigned target balances, things like that.
And, I'm going to suggest going forward that we add the word max and min to some of those tests. So for instance, financial policy compliance, target debt policy, we just add maximum. The next one under target unassigned fund balance minimum. And both of those, that can be a percent of general fund expenditures. And then revenue stabilization fund minimum. So just so that people know that these are targets, but we want to be over or under that. All right.
And so at the end of every fiscal year, there is a section in the audit report that looks at that total fund balance amount. So if we end our year with $57.5 million in fund balance, there is a section in the audit report that will show how our board has designated these funds to be spent, whether they are, I'll put that up here too, whether they are non-spendable because of what they are, like inventory items that we have, whether they are restricted funds, which are like legal restrictions based on the way we obtain the funding, whether they're committed, such as our revenue stabilization reserve fund, we've committed that money. And then we've got assignments, and these are for things like future CIP projects. We know we want to hold money aside for future transportation, future CIP like our courthouse. We have schools turn back money. Some of the larger things we know coming up, we hold money aside for that. We call that an assigned fund balance, and then the remainder is unassigned, meaning that we can use that for operations going forward. We try to keep that unassigned fund balance at around 25%, like we mentioned earlier. So this is just a recommendation of where I think it would make the most sense to keep these funds at. And once we have final figures, we can come back to the board, probably October, I think it usually is, to get a check-in and make sure everybody's on the same page of if this looks good. So if anybody has any questions, I can answer those.
Questions on this?
Yes. So just want to make sure I'm reading this right. So while the funds are being put towards capital projects, it looks like the majority of those capital projects, 4.4 million, are being recommended to go to the schools?
Yes. Our FY24 budget, the general fund transfer, more is going to the schools than county operations.
So even though so ours is going down $500,000.
So I will say the 4.4, I tried to put a last year versus this year, and last year it wasn't broken out, it was just one big transfer to CIP, whereas this year it's broken out. So that 4.4 million in the 22 column included county and schools. So if you compare that to this year, it's an $8 million transfer. We spent a lot, as you know, we spent a lot more in CIP this year than last, or 24 than 23.
I guess what's difficult for me is we're recommending changes, but I can't see what the changes were from. So the proposed amount is new as of today, but I don't know what was the proposed amount prior to the excess. So for example, we say, that 4.4, let's just use that 4.4 because there's nothing in there before. It's hard to see how we're allocating that extra 9 million because I don't know what the 4.4 was prior to us knowing we were $9 million in positive. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, basically what I understand you're saying is when we approved the budget in April, we had recommendations of where money was going to be spent from.
Exactly.
And that's what you want to see now, what's changed from that dollar amount to
Exactly.
do that.
And I would like to, just because, we've got 2 fire stations and a courthouse to build, I just want to make sure we're balancing the needs appropriately. Because I've been very generous with the schools.
Yes.
And Mr. Chair, is there action in the board meeting in this regard?
When you were finished, I was going to visit that. I'm looking for it now. I believe there's a action in a board packet, BOS packet, about approving this allocation. I'll find it here in a second. I know I have it.
I think the actual motion is made in October, but you tell me.
I think this is maybe what you're referring to, presentation on the 2023 year-end fund balance projections and fund balance assignments. The board is to receive information on the preliminary general fund results based on information the board is requested to approve assigned uses of general fund balance as of June 30. And I believe this is an age just meeting for 8-1. So it looks like the board will be asked to approve these at least on a tentative basis, because these are not final. These are preliminary results. But the idea would be to approve this, and then when we true it up at the end, if there's any adjustments from that point, then we approve adjustments.
So you're going to crack down.
Is that the understanding?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I brought this up in my 2x2s. I'd like to see that number. So, but as long as we can, there's another, it's not final yet, that'd be great.
But we will be asked, the board will be asked to consider whether or not we approve these.
Okay.
So if you how far to do it, change now, so you can see.
Who's adding in a column?
It sort of changes, but for the next meeting or whatever. But if you eyeball this really quickly, there's about, let's see, well, a couple things. Where it says FY24 capital projects, if you add that and the line below it, we're increasing by about $4 million. In the line below that, future transportation, about $1 million. And then skip 2 down, future CIP budget, about $5 million. That's about $10 million right there. So basically, it's being put toward future CIP projects. And it's being assigned, not committed, and it's just being earmarked and set aside, if you will. So effectively, virtually, the entire operating surplus is being set aside for future capital spending. But I'm going to maybe suggest that we can drop the FY24 in front of the county projects and the schools, so that whenever it's needed, if it's needed, it can be drawn down. It could be needed in 24, it could be needed in 25, it could be toward the courthouse in a couple of years, it could be toward the high school in a couple of years. It's just that it's available, being set aside without being overly specific about where it's going to go. So that's effectively what's been going on here. Now the other thing I might put up for discussion, we talk about the revenue stabilization fund being committed as opposed to assigned. It's basically a set aside that the board has decided to do, set aside funds to stabilize revenues in the case of a recession or some extraordinary item, so we don't have to fire people if it's a one-year kind of thing. This kind of spackles in that drop. But committed, in my mind, means that it may be where we've signed a contract to paint this room, and we've committed money to do that. In this case, the board took action to set it aside. The board can take action to draw it down. The board can take action to take it all out of there. The board can take action to change that policy of 3%. It's still under the board's control. It hasn't left our control. So is it truly committed, or is it really just assigned and as a placeholder and set aside with some rules about how you can take it out and put it in? That'll come in later when we talk about changes to the financial policies, because I'm going to introduce, among other things, the concept of a minimum available reserves. Available reserves meaning assigned and unassigned, because they're both available for this board to take action with. And the reason I'm introducing that is it's a concept that the credit rating agencies look at and say, if the county got in trouble, what are its available resources to meet that need? And we could certainly reclassify, we could empty, we could do a lot of different things with either assigned or unassigned. And so they're both available. So later on, I'm going to be introducing that concept. And if we leave the revenue stabilization fund as committed, then we're saying it's not available for this board to use. And I think that may be a mischaracterization at some level. So without being too liberal and fast on this, if we were to change that committed for the RSF, change it from committed to assigned, it would drop additional funds down to assigned, drop additional funds to available because it would be available. And that's kind of the implications that from that reassignment, if you will. So, thoughts on that, on reclassifying the RSF?
Did these already flow through the proposed edits to the financial management policies?
No, this is
Okay. Then the second piece too is there any reason why fiscal year 24 was designated in that way, or has it just been flowing through 23, 22, 21, and historically?
Well, the amounts that are listed as FY24 are what was actually adopted as the general fund transfer for 24. So that's separate from the future CIP projects because that's more down the road guesses of how much money we're going to need. But I mean, we could condense
I do like
it
the
all.
flexibility concept.
Yeah, we can condense it. It's fine.
So for instance, we just covered the annual results and we saw that there was a transfer of $7 million. Now that potentially could have come from the FY23 CIP time balance, but with a 17 million operating surplus didn't need to. So that may or may not happen again. This would give us the flexibility. She's dropped FY24. It's there. If we need it in 24, great. If we don't, great, but it's there. And we should have set aside money that if we approved it in a budget, should set aside at least that much in those reserves, but whether it's this year, next year, the year after, whatever it's best needed, I guess. So those are some thoughts. Additional thoughts on those proposed revisions to the numbers?
So, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
There seems, so knowing what we talk about a lot, there are future boards coming and, they may have the same philosophies. Is this a year-to-year committed? Because what I'd struggle with is I do think you should have your rainy day fund. And it should be as a last resort, break glass in case of emergency kind of thing. What's the benefit? How do we ensure that happens?
Right, that's a good point. The revenue-ization, the rainy day fund, sometimes is put in what they call a lockbox, and sometimes they put it in a shoebox with a top off. It's just easier to get at. This are set aside for the RSF is an assigned balance, but the financial policy has restrictions on when and how it can be accessed and when and how it would need to be replenished. So those restrictions are in the financial policy. So it's not, so it is an attempt to make it more like a lockbox than just a shoebox with a top off. So it's not just access it anytime you feel like it, make sure it's raining. The state has a little different approach. They can access the rainy day funds when the sun's shining, and we didn't think that was appropriate.
So I guess the question for me, so was this new, say, last 12-ish years, this committed fund assignment, or has this preceded?
The establishment of an RSF was done before I went up to New York to meet with the rating agencies because they'd like to see rainy day funds, revenue stabilization funds, called that. The state has one, a lot of the counties have one, all the AAAs have one, so we wanted to be able to have them check that box and say, yes, we have a revenue stabilization fund. So that's why it was established. But then the thought was, what kind of restrictions do you put on in terms of when it can be accessed? How do you define rain? To make sure it's raining when you go in there as opposed to just because you feel like spending it. And so we took an attempt, and you'll see some more changes as we get to the financial policy, where I'm suggesting some changes on how and when you can access it as well. The establishment goes back 6 or 8 years. That's an important piece of the puzzle. And we set it up as a percentage of the budget, so as the budget grows, the balance in there needs to grow at 3% of budget. So if the budget doubles, then you need to double the revenue stabilization funds.
Well, and I'm going to ask for an opinion, Mr. Chair, but if we had a situation that we truly viewed as a rainy day, that single line item would be one of 20 that we would be working on adjusting. I mean, tell me if I'm incorrect.
No, you're not. And in fact, roll back to 2020, pandemic. We approved the budget in April of 20, and by May, June, it was clear that the entire economy was shutting down. Rather than tap the rainy day fund, we cut expenses 8% across the board on public safety, and we cut revenue expectations 8% across the board. So yes, the 3% of budget, we cut revenue expectations by 8% and expenses to go with it, rather than tap that. And then if things turn out worse than we thought, that's always available.
Yeah.
But it's not your first go-to. It doesn't have to be, shouldn't be. Even if it is one, you don't have to take it out, but it's available.
But that's why I personally think the lockbox term gets misconstrued, is that is a vault that we only access in this situation. I want to convey to everybody involved with the county that we're going to be pulling dozens of levers, not a lockbox lever in a downturn.
Yes.
And it is,
Absolutely.
that 3 million or 3.5 million is commingled with all the other general. It's not even in its own bank account. So, I mean, we keep it separately in our fund balance allocation.
And I guess my point is just because we would, doesn't mean somebody else would.
That's okay, yeah.
That's always the reality
Yeah.
we can't control them by the hands.
Yeah, and when I met with the rating agencies, their rating is what they view as bankruptcy remoteness. So to get a very high rating, you have to be very remote, further away from the cliff. And I said, well, if a recession hits, disaster hits, and our revenue, assessed values of our real estate drops 10%, and our revenues drop 10%, the bad news is we'll end up with a balanced budget because we're running a 10% surplus. And if it rains even more and it's down 20%, then, so you go through all that math. Well, we've got 25 million unassigned. It doesn't even need it for, So I went through all those things. That's when we got the AAA that said, okay, so that rain, the RSF, they check the blocks that we have one. We lock it up a little bit, but to your point, there's a lot of other levers before you get to that point. And of course, one is just taking action on the annual budget immediately, because we can meet in any month and say we're going to adjust the budget. I'm going to keep moving here. Any other thoughts or questions on that? Because before we move off of that, I guess if there's no additional discussion, I'll entertain a motion to recommend to the Board of Supervisors either approval or amendment of this as presented. So is there a motion to something to that effect?
I move to recommend to the board as presented.
Okay, do we have a second? It's moved and second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Any abstentions? All right, so just to be clear, we just recommended that the board, on these preliminary results, do an initial allocation, okay? So this isn't locking us in, but it's saying we got to do something with this surplus. We can't just let it hang out there. So thank you for that. All right. Next item on the agenda is to consider amendments to the financial policies. You've all had a copy of the policies circulated in advance. Looks a little something like this. And are you going to walk us through this as well? Or?
Sure. When we had 2x2s with Mr. Peterson, we talked briefly about this, so I have gone ahead and made some suggested changes, but we're going to review them with everybody, and if anybody sees anything to change, we can do that. This is an 11-page document, but this is page 1 and this is page 2 of the table of contents. So, page 3, yeah. We've got the objectives. These are very, very high-level, generic objectives. Do we want to go through it in depth? I mean, you've got it in front of you. We'll go straight to the changes.
To answer that question, what's going to be asked of us at the end of this meeting?
Probably to approve the recommended changes.
I think we need to do some, maybe not totally in depth,
Right.
maybe just the high points.
Yep. All right, I don't think anyone's looking to change the objectives, but feel free to review them. Let us know if you would like to see anything added, because this went out last week. All right.
Mr. Chair, can I just add one comment sooner than later so I don't forget? Can I don't know if a motion needs to be made, but I think the red line is critically important to policy changes like this in not just us understanding it, but if it gets posted in a public forum, people understanding it. I'd love if this red line document found its way into,
Yeah.
and if it already does, I appreciate it, but I think so often, you've got to print the last one and the most recent one, and then it's sort of being a lawyer. You can't do
It's an
it.
excellent comment. You're on the point, and this is something that I was going to bring up as well, which is you've got the black line in front of you. We're going to go through some recommended changes that show the red line, and we can discuss. And if we have a consensus around these changes, perhaps at our next BOS meeting, Board of Supervisors meeting, we certainly in advance the red lines and ask the board to approve those policy changes at the next board meeting.
Okay.
There's no urgency. We want to develop a consensus around this.
Yeah.
My shadows are growing pretty long on my tenure on this. I want to try to get some of this accomplished. So,
But I do love this
But-
presentation around policy, and maybe it's something we get even broader on over time.
we get you red lines before the next board meeting, before you're asked to consider.
Yeah.
At this meeting, maybe if we can develop a consensus. And if there's additional changes or amendments beyond that, we can make those to the red line as well.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
so if it's beyond what we're hearing.
And red line, for the public watching, red line is, Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
the last document only showing the specific changes in red, just since we are live streamed.
Yes, sir. Excellent, excellent, excellent.
Yeah, so the red line is what we've got up here. The first change that we're looking to make is we initially in our policy, we're talking about just overall a balanced budget. We're looking to add the word structurally balanced budget, which focuses more on the operating revenue and expenditures rather than any use of fund balance to balance the budget. The way our policy was written before this change, you can see at the end it says including use of fund balance. We'd like to take that out. That's just how, it's too easy to balance a budget with
It
fund
makes it a much
balance. It's all
sounder
down.
budget.
Yes.
If you're not considering that as a balanced budget.
Yeah, a couple of things real quick on this. What we're doing is we're introducing the concept or notion of a structurally balanced budget as opposed to a simply balanced budget. Because balanced budget can be balanced issuing debt, drawing down reserves. There's a number of different ways to come up. And the state only requires state code a balanced budget, not a structurally balanced budget. What we're suggesting is introducing the concept that our annual operating revenues will equal our annual operating expenses. And that's a structurally balanced budget, excluding any debt issuance or drawdown of reserves, gamesmanship to be able to balance the budget that way. Now, one of the things we can talk about though is if it is raining and we tap the rainy day fund to balance the budget, it's a revenue stabilization fund. Should those drawdowns of the RSF, that 3%, be included in those revenues because we're doing it intentionally to stabilize and there's a replacement provision that says you got to replace these funds. Can that be viewed as a justified substitute for annual operating revenues to get us through what would be viewed properly at the time as a temporary issue as opposed to, it's raining, as opposed to it's the sun shining, we just want to empty the reserves. So that we might include, and I would also suggest that we can exclude, and I don't know if this is in there or not, exclude the CIP transfer. So, for instance, every year we transfer about $7 million, and that's on our budget. It's in our adopted budget. So do we want to balance the structural balance, the revenues and expenses above that line, excluding any capital expenditures that are not annual operating?
Yeah.
So if we say, okay, drawdowns to the RSF are okay, excluding CIP transfers, so that you're really trying to capture really just the operating health of the county. Does that make sense?
It does.
And Mr. Chair, the reason we would do that is it's a truer representation of actual cash flow.
Financial
Correct.
health of the county.
Yeah, I
I want to
just
make
want-
sure we don't wander off the porch by using artificial means does that make sense?
Yes.
Staff okay with that? Is that okay? Did you write down some of those changes so we can add that? And then I don't know if you need to add the red line you did structurally in 3, did you need to add that in 2 as well where it says to enhance financial capacity?
Structurally balanced budget.
Yeah, if you want to just throw that word in there, you can't use that word enough, I guess, make sure folks understand that we're doing a structurally balanced budget here. Other thoughts on this first change? So it's introducing the concept of a structurally balanced budget, which I think is appropriate. How we do it, if this creates some problems, we can always adjust it, but I think introducing the concept and getting into the document makes sense.
Okay, our next change was adding a little more words to the capital improvement budget policies where it's just making clear that we have a 25-year plan. We only adopt the funding for the first year. We plan the funding for the next 4 years, well, first 5 years. So we're just kind of adding some more details into this. So we will develop a 5-year funded plan for capital improvements to be reviewed and updated each year as part of a 25-year plan.
So just to be clear, we're saying we're keeping the 25-year CIP. We're challenging ourselves to find revenue sources to fund the first 5 years. But the entire plan, if you look at it, is over $610 million. And trying to identify $610 million worth of sources is just a little staggering. For the first 5 years, we feel is important. By year 6, 7, or 8, things may change. Economic development, recessions, an awful lot of things could change. Now, so all this says is, make sure you have. Now we're not appropriating. We're not approving. What we're saying is identify some potential sources.
Excuse me. Are we? Yeah, I don't want to address inappropriate.
You're right ahead.
Way. The only concern I have is for 2 points we've dealt with in the last year, and I've seen in the financial markets, is 5-year terms are now 3-year terms across the board. You're not seeing 5-year money outside of the capital markets. So, there might be funding sources we use that are bank debt, other alternative sources. Not that bank debt financing is alternative in any way. But I just, and then additionally, not only the terms, but the markets can be closed, as we've seen, for specific issuances. So I don't want, I understand, I think your last point you just made addresses my concern, but the term funded to be misconstrued as well, to fully funded versus appropriated and the like. And I don't want to mislead any reader of a policy, and you might have to be crazy to want to dig into our policies on your own volition, but.
No, I agree with that 100%. The difference between funded or identified sources. Funded means you've actually signed commitments, you have the drawdowns and all that. So it's a little bit technical, but it is important because words matter.
Yeah.
So I would suggest rather than a funded plan, just have identified sources to provide, to meet the expenditures in that plan.
So the equivalent of a sources and uses table where it's not a contractually bound obligation.
Bingo.
It's an idea, a concept. It's a strong concept.
Does that work?
So, Mr. Chair, so if I think back to our last budget, right, I think I really like this because I think it parlays the conversation we had last year, which I kept looking at the 3 columns out going, okay, we're planning for 1 year. I'm really looking at the year 2 years from now, and there was no conversation in the plan. This would kick off that conversation of, well, we may have to issue bonds, or we may have to do, we'll sort of at least have an earmark of where these funds are going to come from.
Yes, during that 5-year window, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And it will also limit the discussion about year 23.
Yes.
We'll get there when we get there, kind of thing.
Okay.
But I do think year 2, 3, and 4 remain.
I think I really like this.
Good. All right, good. Okay, that's really it on the capital improvement plan. It's just to focus on 5 years, not all 20. But we want to know what's out there. So all 25-year plan that will stay in place. Okay, next item.
All right, we have debt policies to which we're making no changes. That just talks about our percentages we like to stay within. No changes to that. Fund balance reserve policies. We are adding a section where we discuss our minimum fund balance. Our current policy only refers to our unassigned fund balance, and we're looking to, kind of like Mr. Peterson talked about earlier, combine that assigned and unassigned and call that available fund balance. We'll still have the targets for unassigned, but we're also going to have a target for our available fund balance, and we made our target to be between 55 and 65%. Around 60% is what we are currently in the past couple years have been, and it's what we were at when we got the triple rating. So we're just adding that piece in. It's not going to be hard to meet. We're already there, and we've already been there. We're just adding some wording to keep us there.
Yeah, and again, just as Carl mentioned, this is something rating agencies look at, is what you have available. The range that we're talking about here gives us a little flexibility to move around in the range. It also is a range around the level when I went up to get the AAA, so we know that it'll keep us in bounds on the AAA rating. And we also know it had been fairly stable for several years before that on a percentage basis. Now, as the budget grows, these percentages will grow. But again, if we reclassify the $3 million of committed RSF down to assigned, that will also help us meet these balances as well going forward. So, but it's introducing a new concept. In fact, I would maybe suggest number 6, defined term, available balance, just really assigned plus unassigned. And then add the red language that says county's available fund balance will be in this range, in the target development range. Does that make sense to you?
I'll ask a clarifying question.
Okay,
Based
sure.
on any contractual language or policy language, the safest situation to be in is the rating agency said the 100 AAA counties or municipalities are doing this exact range, this exact thing, and likewise, these are the last 10 deals we've seen in the market. This range, I mean, when we put a number range like that, I just want to make sure that it's everybody knows this is not coming out of the Finance and Audit Committee's minds. This is coming from the biggest entities that dictate our financial situation moving forward, and we're not just sitting in the back room trying to figure these numbers out.
Exactly. I think the safest, obviously, is we know what they accepted last time as supporting. Now, I will tell you, when I went up there were some areas where Boots was a single A, some areas where we were a double A, and this was one where we were a very, very strong AAA that helped offset some of the single A. But I'll also mention that as a county grows, Fairfax, for instance, has 15 or 20% instead of our percentage. But that's 150 or 200 million, and they could build 5 schools out of cash. For us, this level, 60%, which is much more than their 15, that 50 million can only build 1 school. So they can build 10 schools out of cash, we can build 1. It means that we need to have a higher percentage of budget to meet hard dollar numbers that are catastrophic in nature. Whereas once you get to be a behemoth and have $1 billion school budget, you can maybe let the percentage drop a little bit, but the nominal dollars are so big they overwhelm everything else. So it's not that every AAA has this level, but we're the only county our size that has the AAA, and in part because we have this level. So all the gears are connected, I guess.
But Mr. Balders, would you feel more comfortable adding some language to our policy about, the purpose of this is to preserve our AAA rating, or not really?
Absolutely, in advisement with the rating agent, in active ongoing advisement with the rating, something even that more specific.
Okay.
You could say credit rating.
Yeah.
Credit, being sensitive to credit rating implications.
Yeah, and we also are not going to go to them every year.
Sorry?
And we're also not going to go to them every year. That's not the way the calendar works with these agencies.
Well, it's about every 3 years.
Mr. Chair, can I make another point?
Sure thing.
This is more of a formatting thing, if I understand this correctly. So we have the header minimum fund balance. With this, would it be appropriate to add another header for the county's available fund balance to avoid confusion? Because when I first looked at this, I thought, well, we're sort of taking on the minimum fund balance and maybe taking it from here, which actually would reduce the amount that we have on hand, but that's not what's happening. So I think from a formatting perspective, make sure these are distinctly different.
That's fine with me. Yep, absolutely.
Oh, well,
Sounds about right.
Neil, tell me if I'm wrong. Sorry, Chairman. Mr. Stonehour. Yes. And Chair, please tell me if I'm wrong. Moving that to the defined term, as Mr. Peterson mentioned, I think addresses that, especially capitalized.
Okay.
And put on.
That's right.
I understand the misunderstanding, but I mean, in professional stuff that the chair and I do, the capitalized terms are the end-all be-all, and that's the thing we go by. So yes, so.
Could be as simple as minimum fund balances, plural, and then subheading over each paragraph, one being unassigned, one being available. That way, we're looking at balances, and here's the two different cuts. Good. All righty, all right, we can keep moving here. Yeah, talk as fast as we finish, commercial.
Okay.
Okay.
I made no changes to the revenue stabilization reserve, but you may have had some ideas.
I have some thoughts on this, on how to define rain and when and how it should be accessed. I think it should be less subjective and more quantitative so that it doesn't leave as much room for variability. So one thought, one approach would be to tie the access of that to drawing it down for our budget for either the current year or the future year in two ways. One for the current year, that if we take a look mid-year, halfway through, if the actuals realized have dropped by 3% versus our budget expectation, so there's actually a decline, and I'm going to tie that to year over year as opposed to versus what we were hoping for. Because you can hope for 10%, only get 8, and go, oops, it's raining. Well, no, it's not. You're up 8%. So if you tie it to a year over year change and say, this first half of this year, we're running behind last year, then I would say that's a bit of rain for this year. So maybe the second half of that year, you could access it. The other thing is for the coming year, if you think about our budget cycle, we adopt the budget in April in full view of the assessments that were done in January. Assessments are done calendar, budget's approved fiscal. We have a window from January to April to know whether the assessments are going up, down, or sideways. And in full view of that for the coming fiscal year, the next fiscal year, the one that we adopt in April, if the assessments in January show a decline of 3%. So then you're tying it to very measurable things that say, yes, it's raining, and you can access it when you need it. Does that make those concepts make any sense? When can I access it this year? Well, if we're running way behind last year. When can I access it for next year? Well, if the assessments show you're going to collect less for next year, then you probably maybe have the ability to access it.
I guess the question is, how is that different than what's currently here?
Well, this is a little.
Is this a new section?
You're not seeing any red line here. This is the existing. This has been what we've been operating under. It tried to define rain. It says third or fourth quarter forecast general fund revenues, excluding use of fund balance to decline by more than 1.5%. From what? From the budget? From prior year? From what? And rather than look at it every quarter and test it, let's just take a peek halfway through. Are we running behind last year or not? It's an attempt to simplify it. Same concept, just simplify it and tie it to quantitative. Same thing for subsequent. During the annual budget cycle, January through April, if real estate assessments are forecast to decrease, well, we know in January whether it decreased or not. I mean, we have that information, so we don't need to look at forecasts for the coming budget year, which starts July 1st, right? That's a forecast. Well, I mean, the forecast may have been based on actuals from January's assessments, but the bottom line is, how about just tying it to those assessments as opposed to forecasting? So those are two suggestions. I'm open to interpretations. I'm trying to tie it to quantified items, either assessed values or actual declines, so we know it's raining, and then making it simple. Only do it once a year, maybe twice a year at most, and then have that be when you can access it. Now the policy itself talks about when we need to replenish it, and we don't need to change that. It basically says you got 3 years to put it back if you use it. And you can only use half of it each time. So if there's a recession going to go on for 2 years, you can get half the first year. So thoughts on trying to improve number 1 and 2 here, current fiscal year and subsequent fiscal year, on when and how to define rain.
Mr. Peterson, I think the actual concept you proposed, by using that term, is the right way to go. Secondly, I just want to throw out there, in my mind, any reasonable economic scholar or pundit would say these align with what we would call a recession, which is good markers for us to make these types of adjustments.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for those comments. Mr. Spinauer, any thoughts or ideas as your gears turning over there?
A little bit. Slowly, but they're turning. The only question I would have is based on the changes we've proposed earlier. in the last paragraph, it talks about the order of expenditures of funds. Do we need to remove this restricted? Or is that, does that order still apply? It may. It's just really a question.
Do we need it? Well, I don't think we need to introduce available here because assigned and unassigned are both available. They're shown as an order here.
All right. The only other thing I'd say is to so I may have skipped ahead for your question, but for the sake of time, must be replenished 3% level, 3 years, or what?
It's a policy that this board can explain why we couldn't get there. Recession continues, whatever. I mean,
But that does give staff priorities as we build the budget of where available funds are allocated. So that would probably be allocated before we maybe do some new project.
It is more guidance. The or what is we violate policy. That's the or what, for what that's worth. But you're right, it is just guidance. There isn't any go to jail or... Yes, ma'am.
Can I say one thing?
Absolutely.
So when you're talking about forecasted, only half the year is forecasted.
Yes.
Okay, so just so you know that you still will be some forecasting. It's not all determined.
Yes, the second half of the year is typically assumed to be no change until we have...
Right, but it's the
otherwise.
first half of the following year that falls within the fiscal year that has not been assessed.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
So you won't know what that is at the time that you're doing this. So there is some forecasting.
Okay, I'm with you 100%. It's,
Okay.
The underlying assumption or forecast is no change until we hear otherwise, right? If the assessor comes back and they went up or they went down, it's kind of surprised, like, okay, what happened? But you're right, there's a bit of uncertainty, I guess.
Yes,
in the
it's
budget.
not the official assessment. Right.
Because implicitly we're forecasting a collection rate too, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, that is true.
And a tax rate. I mean, at that point, you don't know.
That's true.
what the tax
There's
rate
all
will be.
kinds of
So my only thing is I would probably forecast in there.
Big forecast.
Well, I want to propose one, a recommendation is, I agree with you that 2 dates in time in a year is about as much as we'd ever want to address this. To your point, I think I'd love a small table that says, based on actual assessment numbers coming in, this is the expected date, because then we can then align that with the board's review of these numbers at a certain board meeting, based on when we expect to have those semi-annual assessment numbers. So I mean, I don't, some of these areas you want to remain vague, but something to that point, I think we could do ourselves a favor by just putting in a, period 1, period 2, this is the expected date, footnote, these are based on actual numbers coming in from the revenue, Goochland County revenue collection. If that's a...
So the suggestion is to continue to tie it to a date and event quantifiable as opposed to
Yeah, I mean,
more subjective.
I think that's a valid concern, so I want to, to me, that's a proposal to address it.
So that if we get new information, based on that new information, then we adjust our forecast? Is that-
Yeah, so, well, what I was just getting at was that if you're going based off assessment, the assessment for like this year, one half of it is in this fiscal year, the next half is in the following fiscal year. So, and many people, especially on the real estate side, pay annually. So not only are they paying for what's in this fiscal year, but they're also paying for what's in the next fiscal year. So it can get kind of complicated. So I think there is some definite, what I heard was you trying to eliminate the word forecasting. And I think there is going to be some forecasting in there because the first half of the following calendar year, you're not going to know what the assessments are. Also, the June 5th due date, if people are just 30 days or 60 days late, our 97, 98% collection rate, which we have, which is very good, isn't until about a year later. So what do you do with that, that year doesn't count, so we go on the collection rate, so there is going to be some forecasting.
I agree.
What I'm getting
I
at.
agree 100%. There is a lot of squishiness in the
Yes.
numbers and some for. What I'm going to try and do is distinguish between the budget itself and a definition of range. The budget requires an awful lot of forecasting and guesswork and Kentucky winters. I'm trying to simplify the definition of rain, not the budget, but rain as saying, if today we get numbers from the assessor and they drop by 3%, that triggers something. As opposed to saying, we're not going to forecast in the budget, we're going to budget on what we know as hard numbers. No, the budget is very soft and squishy. But the trigger, I'm trying to simplify, that's all. So not trying to change our budget outlook, but just the trigger. Does that make sense?
That makes more sense, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't
Than what I
do the first time.
was envisioning.
Sorry, I
absolutely.
didn't do a very good job the first go around on that.
Well, and I oversimplified it.
Yeah.
Now that you've clarified,
Yeah,
it
it's
is
very
much
complicated.
clearer.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I appreciate those comments, so thank you for that. Really good rubber meets the road on this one,
Yes.
so. All right,
Yeah, well, I had no more red line changes. We've got revenue policy here. It's 2 pages long, and travel and expense policies, but no changes.
okay, so now you're beginning to see why I suggested that we try to develop a consensus around this, that not bring it to the board yet, and we can get you a red line copy in advance of everything we just talked about. Does that make sense to everybody? So we will not recommend anything for the board of supervisors today, but we'll go back and make some red line changes, submit a copy out for the next board meeting, and then address it then. All right?
I do have one
Okay.
quick question.
Fire away.
All this naive, me being in my first year still.
You still playing the new card?
Tax, yeah, it's still good.
I'm still
At least a
playing
year. The tax and fee rate mentions are based on the county's cost of services, and I hate to say this, and the discretion of county administration and our board of supervisors. I don't know if we want, I just feel like there are, I doubt we're gonna have referenda on these points, and I didn't know if we wanted to be more clear about how we're going about this process of setting the fees and the tax rates. It might be too granular.
And that's covered in the budget process. I mean, when we go over,
Okay. There we go.
over all that, and generally we're going to start with what our anticipated revenues are going to be, then we're going to build a budget to match that. And because unless the board changes guidance to us, then we always start
So
with
is it-
that assumption of no increase of fees or revenues. This year we had the assumption of a little lower, so we worked that in as a starting point.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the increased surprise in our operating results more than covered that.
Yeah.
Not more than covered, about 2 to 3 million. Absorb that without any hiccups. Hey, we got enough?
Do we have time?
Minutes left. Yeah, let me do 5 minutes. I'll give us 15 minutes before the next board meeting, if that's all right, Mr. Chair. Let's see, CIP, wow.
It's very tiny.
Now,
We might want to make this its own topic.
we might make it its own topic, but we cover this next time. But very quickly, at the bottom, the revenue sources for the last 10 lines or so show that we've identified revenue sources to meet all the planned expenditures in this budget. So we have a balanced CIP for 5 years. We can go through the line items later, but I believe those orange ones are changes. Is that for the
The orange ones are operating funds.
operating funds as opposed to capital funds? So there is, the top line of revenues is, the orange line is the operating transfer. Like this year, as you know, we transferred 2023, $7 million. This is showing 3 or 4 or 5 each year. So the expectation is we'd be able to cover that transfer and balance the budget for 5 years. This is the 600, let's say 15 or whatever it is, all the way out to the right, the yellow, 650 million. The idea of trying to find sources for all that just didn't seem like. So anyway, that's about it for right now on the CIP. Will the board be asked to approve this?
No, I'm not bringing this up at the board meeting.
We'll do this separately on the next meeting, maybe in greater detail.
I just have one recommendation for the next
Okay.
slide, and tell me if I'm wrong, please. We've got policy on percentages of these two charts. No, the next slide, there's two charts on total debt service by type and total debt service by series. You know, is there a way that we can match that? Just put a single horizontal line on these charts to show projected cushion, because we do have if we're doing a 25-year plan, do we not have the numbers to calculate a
Oh.
projection of those
So
ratios?
this is actually just the current outstanding TCSD debt, which was going to be yet another topic we discussed today.
That's the next
Okay,
topic.
my bad, okay.
We have
There we
a
go.
separate
That's fine.
legal entity, the general fund, and then the TCSD, which is separate legal entity.
Got it.
That morphs into our
Okay.
discussion, which is going to use up our
That's
last
good to clear
2 or
up
3
though, because
minutes.
people might associate that with how we're.
Well, if
funding
nothing
CIP.
else, put the header. Yeah,
Yeah.
make sure it's got a very bold header. Yeah.
Yes, that CIP is the county CIP, not the utilities.
Got it, okay.
Okay, if nothing else on the CIP, we'll dive into this deeper at our next meeting, or subsequent meeting. So now let's shift over to the TCSD, and then we'll adjourn so we get plenty of time for our next meeting. I'm going to comment real quickly on these so we can go through the slides. Really just this one and this one going to.
So
that one.
we sent out 2 different packets. I sent
Okay,
that
all
out,
right.
Pat sent that out. That's a good summary.
You don't have that.
I've got
Okay,
each piece and then
Well,
I've got
we're
the
just-
details of each.
we'll just back up to the line. Okay. 2 or 3 minutes. This is a 1 or 2 hour class, but it's 2 minutes. If you look on the right-hand graph, those green lines are the legacy debt service payments required under the 2002, right? So 21 years ago, the original documents. Those yellow or the green obligations are those obligations. Those are 0 coupon bonds. We can't refinance them. They are what they are. The good news is that in 5 payments they'll be gone. One of those payments is in October this year. This is in fiscal 24, October. So that'll leave us with 4 more payments. Once that's done, a couple things will happen. One is it will release us for all the restrictions and obligations under the original documentation under which those bonds were issued. Correct me if I'm wrong on this.
You keep going, I'm following along.
Now, the subsequent refinances, which we did 2 of them, were issued under amended and restated bond documents, which incorporated a lot of the original, but incrementally tried to release us from some of the most restrictive provisions without getting into too much detail in the weeds. As we got better and as the district got healthier and as we got a credit rating, we were trying to gradually get out from underneath that. But without going into too much detail, the bottom line is when those 5 payments are made, 1 in October and 4 more, all the 0 coupon bonds will be gone. Those are, interest rates are around 5% or higher, so all the 5% money will run off and will be released from the original bond documents and only subject to the remaining bond documents for the 2 restructured, which were amended and restated versions of the original documents. I don't know if I'm making any sense here. But then, as you can see, another year's payment after that, the greens are gone. The 2012 current interest bonds get paid off as well. And those have a fairly high interest rate as well. So in the next 6 years, we'll get rid of all of our 5% interest, actually anything above 2.5% interest will be gone. All the zeros will be gone. None of it is floating rate. It's all fixed rate, and it's all 2.5% or less. And you can see the debt service payments drop fairly dramatically. So then the other question is, how soon can we start to nibble away at some of the existing? The green lines, the original deal, cannot be refinanced. The other 2 deals, all of it can be refinanced. Now, there's a thing called an economic make-whole that I inserted for optional early redemptions. But under that economic make-whole, some of the 2012s are redeemable today at par. So we could, if there were excess revenues or excess surplus, could start to chisel away at the other monies as well and try to get this retired. The idea would be to retire it as soon as feasible, which would do several things. It would potentially eliminate the ad valorem tax, which everybody hates. It will release all the collateral that's been pledged under these bond documents. It will release the county from some of the restrictions under these bond documents, such as we can't do this, you can't let people in, you can't let people out, all those restrictions. And it will return control of the district back to us once these are all gone. So the other thing is it will redirect the 55-45 revenue sharing back to the county and provide the county with a significant revenue stream going forward every year. So there's a number of different benefits to citizens, the county, and everyone else to try and get rid of this stuff. But you can't take it out unless it's callable and refinanceable. And those green ones are not, but all the yellows and blues, well, everything under the 2012 and 2020 restructurings, all that can be taken out. So,
Yeah.
stop me, pause there, questions, thoughts?
The obvious question we're gonna get from some people is, oh, you're telling me green goes away and it's 2 years before we have a material change. Was that just a payment waterfall in, okay, well, we're gonna stay the course on the green line, so to speak, and make up for the 2012s at the very end, or was that something different?
This is a combination of what can we touch, what can we refinance
Yeah.
that's expensive enough to save some money, and what we can't touch. And unfortunately, there was a lot that we couldn't touch, and that's the bulge up front. So then the question becomes, after year 5, you see a step down in the total debt service. I'm guessing 5 years from now, the 32-cent ad valorem and the 55-45 sharing will continue to generate additional funds. That's what could be available to take out all the rest of those payments after the green, because they're all refinanceable or subject to optional early redemption, which means you can take them out and pay them off. So the idea would be to redirect that cash flow, accelerate the repayment, and get out of those bonds early. Does that make any sense? Because then all kinds of good things happen after that.
And is the reason the blue line increases in 2030 is because we'll probably, by that time, have taken our second piece of the bond, from the bond referendum from the courthouse? And that's
Totally different debt. This is just TCSD debt.
just TCSD, okay.
Yeah, the schools and courthouse are general obligation bonds, which are backed by the full faith and credit of the entire county. These are backed by a collateral pledge group that includes everything that has to do with the Turco Creek Service District.
So all of this is already outstanding. We've already issued it.
Okay.
So this obviously shows no new debt being added. for addition.
No new debt. No new debt. There are increased payments because the capital appreciation bonds, the zero coupon bonds keep snow plowing the interest, and we can't touch those. It's effectively borrowing more each time, and you're borrowing the interest on those zero coupons every year. Effectively, there's nothing we can do to touch it.
If you don't redeem early, is that all far out it really goes, is 2042?
And just for clarity, the TCSD is collecting sufficient revenue to make those debt service payments. It's not underwater at this point.
No plan.
No plan to be. No plan to be.
At this point, Captain.
We might overlay a line graph on that as percentage TCSD debt service as a percentage of expected revenue, because then you won't just see a smooth decrease, you will see a much more serious decrease as a percentage of the total revenue.
As the district grows, the debt service, you can inflate your way out, right? As
Yeah.
more revenues come in from property value increases, your fixed rate. Like I said, there's no variable rate in here either. It's all fixed rate. So that's chiseled in stone, so as your revenues grow in relation to this, it enables you to be able to take it out even sooner. But that's all I had. Any other thoughts or questions? If not, I'm going to call this meeting adjourned.